Hey there. Before we begin tonight, let's take a moment to get you truly comfortable. Really take your time with this. Adjust those pillows until they feel exactly right. Maybe one under your head, maybe one tucked beside you. Pull that blanket up slowly. Feel the warmth settle around you. If you have a fan running or some soft background noise, let it wash over you. We're going to be together for a while tonight. Long enough for the world to slow down. And I want you completely at ease before we step into the cold. I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is there. There's something wonderful about imagining all of us gathered from every corner of the world, warm in our beds, about to step together into a medieval winter that most of us can barely fathom. And if these videos help you sleep or unwind after a long day, a like or subscribe means more than you know. It keeps this little community alive and growing. Now, before we go anywhere, before we step back 700 years, I want you to do something for me. Feel the blanket around you right now. Feel the warmth. Feel the weight of it. Feel how the air in your room is a perfectly controlled temperature. Not too cold, not too hot. Think about the fact that when you wake up tomorrow morning, that room will still be the same temperature. That your house has insulation in its walls. That you have a furnace or a heat pump or central heating of some kind that will maintain your comfort without you lifting a single finger. Think about the fact that you have food in your refrigerator, in your pantry, that tomorrow you can go to a store and buy whatever you want to eat, regardless of the season. Think about the clothing in your closet, layers of it, warm jackets, heavy sweaters, waterproof boots. Think about the lights in your home, how you can turn them on at any hour and banish darkness completely. How darkness, for you, is a choice rather than an inevitability. Hold all of that in your mind. Hold the warmth and the food and the light and the comfort. Because everything I've just described, everything you take completely for granted, is everything a medieval person did not have. And in winter, that absence wasn't merely uncomfortable, it was potentially fatal. Winter was when the margin got thin, when everything a family had stored, had built, had prepared through the long months of spring and summer and harvest. Spafofave patino dorinamoi. Subios, Zaimiana duos. To Saimatio zitabwest. When the difference between enough and not enough became the difference between March and no March at all. Tonight, we're going to spend an entire winter inside a medieval village. Not just a day, not just a week, but the full span of a medieval winter. From the first cold winds of late October, through the brutal heart of December and January, through the desperate final weeks of February, and into the fragile hope of early March. We're going to experience every aspect of winter survival. The preparation that began months earlier, the management of food stores, the battle against cold in homes that were, by any modern standard, barely insulated at all, the shortened days and the profound darkness, the diseases that winter carried with it, the psychological weight of months spent in close, cold quarters, the desperate waiting for spring. We're going to meet several families. We're going to watch them struggle and adapt and endure. We're going to understand winter not as a season, but as a siege. A quiet siege. Slow, patient, relentless. So take one more deep breath. Feel that warmth around you. And step with me into October of the year 1347 in a village called Ashwick in the county of Somerset in the west of England. Ashwick is a village of perhaps 35 households, maybe 180 people clustered together on a slight rise above a river. The rise matters, low ground floods in winter, and flooded ground means wet cottages, ruined stores, sick animals. The village has been positioned where it is for generations, the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who learned the hard way which ground was safe. The village has a church, stone, the most permanent building for miles, a mill beside the river, a blacksmith's forge, a manor house where the Lord's steward lives, about 35 cottages in various states of repair, 2 common fields divided into strips, a common pasture for animals, a wood to the north. It's mid-October, 1347. The harvest is in, and now, with the harvest behind them, the village turns its full attention to a single overwhelming task: surviving winter. Let's meet the people we'll spend this winter with. The Miller family, John Miller, who runs the village mill, his wife Agnes, and their 3 children. Will, age 15, Mary, age 12, and baby Thomas, who is just 4 months old. The Millers are among the better-off families in the village. The mill provides income year-round. They eat better than most, have more stored food, have a slightly larger cottage. But winter still threatens them, as it threatens everyone. The Thatcher family, Robert Thatcher and his wife Ellen. They have 4 children, Joan and Cecily, ages 10 and 7, and 2 sons, Edmund, age 13, and little Walter, age 4. Robert is a labourer working other people's land in exchange for wages, or a share of the harvest. They're not wealthy. Their cottage is small. Their food stores are the minimum required for survival, and some years not even that. Winter is a serious matter for the Thatchers. Old Margaret lives alone, which is unusual and somewhat precarious. Her husband died 5 years ago. Her children are grown and have their own households in neighbouring villages. She has a small cottage, a small garden, and depends on the charity of neighbours to supplement what she can produce herself. Winter, for old Margaret, is an annual test of endurance. Father Thomas is the village priest, better resourced than most, receiving tithes from the village, the closest thing to a doctor that Ashwick has. And Brother Edmund is a travelling monk who arrives in late October and ends up staying the whole winter when a storm makes the roads impassable. He's from a monastery 20 miles away. He'll spend the winter helping the village in exchange for food and shelter. We'll check in on each of these people throughout our long winter journey. We'll see how they prepare, how they struggle, how they endure, and, for most of them, how they survive. October is the busiest month of the autumn, a frantic race to complete preparations before winter arrives. And the most pressing task of all is preserving food. Take a moment and picture the inside of a cottage in October. The fire is burning low but steadily. The air smells of wood smoke and something sharper. Salt, perhaps, and damp cloth, and the faintly earthy smell of root vegetables just brought in from the garden. Outside, the October wind moves through the bare branches of the elm trees at the edge of the village. Every family in Ashwick is engaged in the same fundamental activity, preserving food, because medieval people had no refrigerators, no freezers, no canning technology. They relied on preservation methods refined over thousands of years, and every single one of those methods requires significant work. In October, families are slaughtering animals that can't be kept through winter. Not because they want to, every animal is precious, but because they simply cannot feed them. The math is uncomplicated but hard. If you have 10 animals and enough hay to feed 6 through winter, you keep 6 and slaughter 4. John Miller is slaughtering a pig this week. It's a large pig, fattened all summer. The slaughter is a family event, messy, loud, somewhat difficult for the children, but entirely normal. Nothing is wasted. The meat is salted and packed into barrels. The fat is rendered into lard. The organs are eaten immediately. They won't keep. The blood is made into pudding. The skin will be cured. The bones will be boiled for stock. Every part of this animal will contribute to the family's survival. Salt is perhaps the most important preservative in the medieval world, and also one of the most expensive. Families who can afford it use salt generously. The process is simple but labor-intensive. You pack the meat in dry salt or submerge it in brine, salted water, and leave it for days or weeks until the salt has drawn out enough moisture to prevent spoilage. Robert Thatcher cannot afford salt in sufficient quantities. His family's situation is more precarious. He slaughtered 1 small pig and a rooster, but the preservation is limited. Some smoking over the fire, some hanging in the cold air of the storage area. He knows this meat won't last as long as properly salted meat. He's doing what he can. The fire crackles as Agnes tends the rendered fat. The cottage is warm with the work of it. Outside, the afternoon light is already beginning to thin. Smoking adds another layer of preservation. Meat and fish, smoked over a low fire, acquire chemical compounds that slow spoilage considerably. The Millers have a small smokehouse, really just a barrel with a fire beneath it and a cover to trap the smoke, where they spend several days smoking fish from the river before winter sets in. Imagine the smell of that smoke drifting across the village in the October afternoon. Several families doing the same thing. The air of Ashwick carrying that particular smell of preservation, of preparation, of a village getting itself ready. Drying preserves vegetables, beans, peas, some root vegetables, herbs. Pickling in vinegar or brine preserves others. Cabbage fermented into something like sauerkraut. Onions stored in brine. These methods don't require expensive salt in large quantities, and they produce foods that remain nutritious through winter. If food is the first priority of winter preparation, firewood is the second, and the quantities required are considerable. A medieval cottage is heated by a single fire. That fire burns continuously, genuinely continuously, from October through March, day and night. The fire is never allowed to go completely out, because relighting it from scratch is difficult without matches, requiring preserved embers, a tinderbox, or a trip to a neighbor's fire to carry coals back home. Listen for a moment to what continuous means. 6 months. Every hour of every day and every night. That single fire, breathing steadily in the center of the cottage, asking constantly to be fed. Will Miller has been chopping and stacking wood for weeks. Every day he takes the family's donkey to the woods, loads it with dead wood, brings it back, chops it to size, stacks it under the covered area beside the cottage. His hands are calloused and split from the work. His arms ache, but the wood pile grows. And a growing wood pile means warmth, and warmth means survival. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, onions, store well in cool, dry, dark conditions. Every family has a root cellar of sorts, a pit dug into the ground, lined with straw, covered with boards. The earth maintains a relatively stable temperature, just above freezing, which is ideal for roots. Check them regularly. Remove any that are softening before they infect the others, and they'll last until spring. Grain is stored in the driest part of the cottage, often in wooden chests or sacks raised off the ground to prevent moisture damage. Mice and rats are a constant threat. Every family has a cat, and the cat has never been more important than during grain storage season. A mouse infestation in the grain supply can mean the difference between eating and going hungry. The cat is not a pet in the modern sense. It is a working animal whose role is essential. Robert Thatcher doesn't own a donkey. He carries wood himself or in a handcart when the ground is firm enough. His children help. Edmund at 13 is old enough to carry significant loads, and Joan at 10 manages smaller ones. Their wood pile is smaller than the miller's, and both Robert and Ellen are privately aware that it might not be enough. They'll need to supplement during winter with whatever dry wood they can find on milder days. It is a worry that settles in the back of Robert's mind and stays there. Old Margaret has a more serious problem. She cannot gather wood herself. She's 63 years old, and her joints ache in the cold. She depends on the kindness of neighbors who bring wood periodically, and on her own small store of peat, dried blocks of vegetable matter that burn more slowly than wood and are easier for others to transport to her. Father Thomas has asked some of the younger men to help her. Not everyone does so reliably. She's aware of this, and she plans around it with the quiet practicality of someone who has taken nothing for granted for a very long time. The walls of a wattle and daub cottage develop cracks as the material expands and contracts with temperature changes. Every autumn, the cracks are filled with new daub, that mixture of clay, straw, and dung, stuffed into gaps by hand and smoothed over. Agnes Miller makes a point of walking around her cottage every October, running her fingers along the walls, feeling for cold air coming through. Where she feels a draft, she fills it. Doors and shutters are packed with old rags stuffed into gaps, spare wool blocking drafts. The goal is to make the cottage as snug as possible. Medieval people didn't understand the science of insulation, but they understood perfectly that less air moving through the house meant a warmer house. Before winter arrives, every cottage needs attention. Thatch that has thinned over summer needs patching. Gaps in the thatch mean rain coming through and warmth escaping. Robert Thatcher does his own thatching. It's a skill he's maintained. He spends 3 days on the roof in early October, patching and replacing sections where the straw has deteriorated. It's unpleasant work, high off the ground, physically demanding, requiring balance and care, but necessary. A well-maintained thatch is the difference between a warm cottage and a cold one. Animals that will be kept through winter must be housed, and in many medieval households that means the same building the family lives in. The practice of keeping animals in the cottage might seem surprising to modern people, but it was widespread and genuinely practical. Animals generate significant body heat. A cow produces roughly the equivalent of a small space heater. Several animals crowded into the lower end of a cottage, separated from the family's living space by a low partition, could raise the interior temperature by several degrees. In a winter, where 2 or 3 degrees is the difference between sleeping comfortably and shivering, that warmth is real and welcome. John Miller keeps the family cow, 3 sheep, and the donkey in a small barn attached to his cottage. Agnes has long since made peace with the animals coming inside in winter. The warmth they provide is real, and she is genuinely grateful for it on the coldest nights. Robert Thatcher keeps 2 pigs and a small flock of chickens. The pigs share the cottage's lower end. The chickens roost in the rafters. The sound of chickens settling for the night, that quiet shuffling and soft clucking, becomes the sound of evening in the Thatcher cottage. Medieval winter clothing was layered and made primarily from wool. Wool is remarkable. It retains warmth even when wet. It breathes. It resists wind far better than linen. Medieval people understood this through generations of practical experience. The basic layers: a linen undershift next to the skin. Over that, a woolen tunic or kirtle, heavier weight wool for winter than summer. Over that, a woolen surcoat or gown. And over everything, a heavy woolen cloak with a hood. Feet: leather shoes or boots, sometimes with dried grass stuffed inside for insulation. Woolen stockings. Head always covered. Medieval people understood what modern science has confirmed. You lose an enormous amount of body heat through your head. Everyone wore something on their head at all times in winter. Agnes Miller spends October checking and repairing the family's winter clothes. Every garment examined, holes patched, seams resewn. Baby Thomas, at 4 months, needs careful wrapping, small. Bodies lose heat quickly, and Agnes is attentive to his warmth in a way that has become almost instinctive. Ellen Thatcher is in a more difficult position. Her family's clothing is worn thin. She adds extra stuffing to the children's shoes, makes sure Edmund and Joan have proper mittens she's knitted herself. Walter, at 4, gets the warmest garments because he is the most vulnerable. Ellen checks his feet every morning. Cold feet in a small child are a warning she takes seriously. In the last week of October, a traveling monk named Edmund arrived in Ashwick seeking shelter from a storm that had come in suddenly from the west. He was given a place to sleep in the church, cold but dry, and then the storm continued for 3 days, and the roads became impassable with mud. And somehow the weeks passed, and Brother Edmund is still in Ashwick. He is welcomed. A monk can read and write, knows Latin, has some medical knowledge from the monastery's herb garden and infirmary. Father Thomas is glad of the company. The village is glad of someone who can write letters and calculate numbers. Brother Edmund is experiencing his first secular winter. His winters at the monastery were cold, but structured, communal, softened by stone walls and collective resources and scheduled meals. This is something different. He watches the village with the careful attention of someone seeing something genuinely new. And what he sees both moves and troubles him. He will commit things to careful memory. Not written. He has no materials for extended writing, but structured and deliberate. the way his monastic training taught him. He is, in many ways, our witness for this winter. Through his eyes, we'll see things that the other villagers have long since stopped noticing. As October advances into November, the days grow shorter and the cold settles in. By late October, darkness falls by 4:30 in the afternoon. By the winter solstice, sunrise won't come until nearly 8 in the morning, and sunset will arrive before 4. 8 hours of daylight at most, often less on cloudy days. The preparations are as complete as they're going to be. The food is stored, the wood is stacked, the animals are settled, the clothes are checked and mended. Winter is here. By early November, the village has changed. The rhythm of life that governed spring and summer and harvest, that outdoor, active, light-filled rhythm, has ended. People retreat indoors. The fields are empty. The pace slows. It has to slow because there is less energy available. And the energy that remains must be conserved carefully. Medieval people ate less in winter, not by choice, but by necessity. The food stores must last until spring. Eating generously now means hardship later. Less food means less energy. Less energy means doing less. The long, dark nights were likely spent in more sleep than summer ever allowed, the body naturally conserving what it had. The cold is coming, and now it is here. November arrives with a particular quality of English autumn. Not yet the deep cold of January, but consistently cold, consistently wet, consistently grey. The temperatures hover just above freezing during the day, dropping below at night. Rain falls often. Cold rain. The kind that soaks through inadequate clothing and chills you to the core. Mud is everywhere. The village paths, churned by feet and hooves through the wet months before, are now deep mud that pulls at boots and makes every journey an effort. There is no field work to do. The animals are housed. The preparations are complete. People retreat indoors. Indoor work continues. There was always spinning and weaving, always mending, always carving the wooden tools that would be needed in spring. But the pace slows. The days are short. The evenings are long. Outside, the rain continues to fall. The bare trees along the river stand in the grey light. The thatch of the cottages is dark with moisture. Smoke rises from every chimney hole in Ashwick. 35 fires, 35 families, all burning through their stores, all waiting for the cold to reach its worst before it begins to ease. The cow shifts in her stall at the far end of the room. The sheep settle with a collective sigh. The sounds of the animals are simply part of the soundscape of the cottage, as unremarkable as the crackle of the fire or the rhythm of Agnes's spindle. They've eaten supper already. Pottage. This version heavy with dried peas and a bit of salt pork, thick and filling. The bowls have been wiped clean and set aside. There's bread, a small piece each, less than in summer. They're rationing already, measuring what they have against how long winter will last. Baby Thomas reaches toward the low wooden guard that John made to protect him from the hearth. Mary gently redirects his hands. He looks at her with the calm, interested expression of a baby who finds everything equally worthy of investigation. She smiles at him. After perhaps an hour of evening work, John puts down his bucket repair. "Early night," he says. "It's not a question." Agnes nods. there's no real reason to stay up. The fire will be banked soon, and in the dim light, there's little more to accomplish. Sleep is the most practical use of the long winter night. They prepare for bed. Baby Thomas is wrapped carefully. Agnes is vigilant, never wrapping him so tightly that he can't breathe, but warmly enough that the cold won't reach him. She lost a child 3 years ago to a winter fever that came on quickly and left no time for response. She does not think about that directly, but her hands are careful. Her hands remember. John banks the fire. He places a large log thoughtfully, rakes ash over the smaller embers, positions everything so the fire will burn very slowly through the night, maintaining enough heat to keep the room from dropping dangerously, and keeping the coals alive for morning. They sleep. All of them, in the one room, together. The animals settle at their end. Outside the rain continues to fall. The night is long, very long. The Thatcher cottage is colder. It's smaller, and smaller means less air to heat. The fire they maintain is slightly smaller too. They're being careful with wood already, and it's only November. Robert worries about the wood supply. He tries not to show it in front of Ellen and the children, but he lies awake sometimes running the calculation, what they have stacked, what remains of winter, whether they will make it through. Edmund goes out on clear days to gather wood from the forest. At 13, he's strong enough to carry significant loads. He comes back with armfuls of fallen branches, dead wood, anything dry that'll burn. He does it without complaint, because at 13 he already understands that the family needs it, and understanding the need is enough. Joan and Cecily share a pallet near the fire, sleeping together for warmth. Body heat between sleeping people is significant, and medieval people understood this practically. Families slept together, children shared. Blankets. Everyone arranged themselves as close to the fire as safety allowed. Old Margaret has had a difficult start to winter. The joint pain that plagues her, what we would call arthritis, is significantly worse in the cold. Some mornings she can barely move from her sleeping place until the fire has been going long enough for the room to warm and her joints to loosen. Her food stores are adequate, but not generous. She burns her fire smaller than she'd like, wearing extra layers inside rather than building the fire up. She is often cold, not dangerously cold, not yet, but cold. Father Thomas visits her twice a week. He brings food each time. He has more than she does, and charity is his obligation. She accepts it without excessive ceremony because the food is necessary, not optional. And she has lived long enough to understand the difference between pride and survival. It's a Tuesday evening in mid-November. The sun set at 4:15. Outside, rain is falling steadily, and a wind has picked up from the north. Inside the Miller cottage, the fire burns steadily in the central hearth. The room is smoky. It's always smoky in winter, the smoke finding its way out through the hole in the thatch above, but never quickly enough to clear completely. Everyone in the room has permanently reddened eyes from months of exposure. Their clothing and hair carry the smell of wood smoke at all times. This is simply how home smells. John Miller sits on a stool near the fire, repairing a wooden bucket that cracked in the last cold snap. He's carving a new stave to replace the damaged one. Working by firelight, his big hands moving carefully on the small piece of wood. This is winter work, maintenance work, repair work, making and fixing the tools and vessels that a household requires. Agnes sits across from him, spinning. She's always spinning in winter. The wool must become thread. The thread must become cloth. The cloth must become garments. The cycle is endless. Her spinning is automatic at this point, as natural as breathing. Will sits near his mother, working on a leather harness strap that needs reinforcing before it fails. His movements are slow and careful. He's tired. He's always tired in winter. Mary is watching baby Thomas, 6 months old now, beginning to push himself up on his arms, curious about everything within reach. Mary keeps him carefully away from the hearth, singing softly to herself while she watches him. The room is warm, not warm by modern standards, perhaps 55 degrees near the fire, cooler toward the walls and door. But compared to the rain and wind outside, it's warm enough. It's bearable. December arrives, and with it comes the real cold. Not November's uncertain, almost cold, but genuine winter cold. Frost on the ground in the mornings, ice forming in water containers left outdoors, the river developing a skim of ice at its edges, breath visible in the air at all times. The village changes in December. People move less. The paths between cottages, sometimes frozen now into hard, uneven ridges, are traversed less frequently. The daily walk to collect water from the well is a significant expedition, requiring full winter clothing just for that small journey. The cold is a physical presence that you feel the moment you step outside, settling against your face and hands immediately, reminding you at every moment that the world beyond your walls has turned against warmth and comfort. The world has turned toward winter, and winter is patient. Water is a challenge in medieval winter that modern people rarely consider. You don't turn on a tap. You go to the well, and the well, or at least its rope and bucket, can freeze. Ashwick's well is deep enough that it rarely freezes completely, but the rope and bucket freeze overnight. Every morning, someone must deal with the iced rope, lower the bucket into the cold darkness, draw up water. In summer, this is a minor chore. In winter, it's a test of patience and cold tolerance every single day. Water brought inside must be managed carefully. Cooking water goes immediately into the pot over the fire. Water for animals, for washing, for various household needs, must be kept from freezing until used. Containers are moved indoors. Water left outdoors freezes and potentially cracks its container. There is no complaint about this, no real reaction. It's simply what you do in December, the same as it was last December, the same as it will be next. Christmas falls on December 25th, and in medieval England it is not merely a single day, but the beginning of 12 days of celebration known as Christmastide, running until Epiphany on January 6th. For the villagers of medieval England, Christmastide is the great relief of winter. It is the feast set against the darkness, the warmth set against the cold, the moment of communal joy inserted deliberately into the hardest stretch of the year. The church is decorated with holly and ivy, evergreens that speak of life continuing through winter, of the promise that spring will return. Candles are lit, more candles than the church normally burns, creating an unusual warmth and brightness in the stone space. Father Thomas prepares his best sermon. Brother Edmund assists, his monastery-trained voice filling the church with something the village has not heard before. Christmas Day begins with the early morning Mass, held in the dark hours before dawn. The whole village turns out, or nearly all of it. Old Margaret is helped to the church by Will Miller, who has made a quiet habit of checking on her. She moves slowly, her joints protesting the cold, but she gets there. The church is warm with bodies and candles. For a few hours, the cold retreats. The Lord Steward has arranged a feast for the village. This is tradition, expected, one of the obligations that the Lord owes his tenants in return for their labor. It's held in the manor's great hall, large enough for most of the village to crowd into. Tables are set up. There is more food than the villagers usually see at a single meal. Roasted meat, a whole pig, several chickens, a haunch of salted beef, bread in greater quantity, ale flowing more freely than usual, even some spiced wine from the steward's own supplies. For one evening, the margin between enough and not enough disappears entirely. People eat until they are full, genuinely full. It's a sensation most of them haven't felt since harvest. For adults, like John Miller and Robert Thatcher, Christmas is a reminder of what they are working toward. Not merely survival, but moments of genuine joy within survival. They eat more than usual, aware they'll ration more carefully in January. They judge it worth it. For Edmund Thatcher and Mary Miller, this feast is the single brightest moment of the year. Not for any abstract reason, but simply because of the food and the warmth and the crowded hall and the music. Someone in the village plays a pipe. Someone else beats a small drum. And dancing happens despite the cold and the cramped space. Laughter happens. Songs happen. Children run between the legs of adults with no clear purpose except the joy of running. For old Margaret, Christmas is complicated. The joy is real, but the cold is real. She's grateful for the company and the food and the candles and the singing, but she knows, with the knowledge of the very old, that Christmas is only the middle of winter. There are still 2 months ahead, perhaps 3. The real hardship is still coming. After Christmas Day, the 12 days of Christmastide continue. Work is reduced, not stopped entirely. Animals must always be tended, and water must always be fetched. But the pace eases considerably. More gatherings, more stories told around fires, more communal warmth shared between households. These 12 days serve multiple purposes. Religiously, they mark the period between Christ's birth and the arrival of the Magi. Practically, they give exhausted people a genuine rest. And socially, they represent the village gathered together, sharing warmth and food and stories, maintaining the bonds that are as important to survival as firewood. The evenings are long and quiet. The fire burns. The family sits together. The animals breathe at their end of the room. Outside, the December cold is absolute. But inside, there is warmth enough. And for now, that is sufficient. Brother Edmund watches the village celebrations with quiet fascination. The monastery's Christmas was solemn, focused on prayer and contemplation. This is something different, earthier, louder, more physical. People dancing in the cold. Old people telling stories with dramatic voices and genuine laughter. He finds himself unexpectedly moved. These people have so little, and yet they celebrate with an authenticity that has nothing to do with abundance. He commits the image to memory carefully, as he's been doing since October. He has the feeling that this winter will teach him something that his years of monastery education did not. Epiphany comes on January 6th, and with it, the official end of Christmastide. The celebrations end. The village settles back into the serious business of survival. The cold tightens. The days remain short. The food stores, generous at Christmas, are noticeably reduced now. The wood supplies are being consumed at a pace that concerns the more careful among the villagers, and January is when the serious business gets most serious. January in medieval England is harsh. The temperatures drop further, genuine hard frosts that last not just nights, but days at a stretch. Ice covers everything. The mud of November and December has frozen solid, which makes movement slightly easier. You're not wading through mud, but more treacherous, because frozen ground is uneven and slippery, and a fall is dangerous when you're already weakened by cold and months of restricted food. And restricted food is the central reality of January. Every family entered winter with a calculation. What do we have, and how long must it last? Most estimated needing to last until March. The food stored in autumn was planned against that timeline. But calculations made in October don't always survive contact with January. Sometimes stores are damaged. Mice find the grain. Roots that seem firm in October turn soft. Salted meat develops mold. These losses are serious. Every pound of food lost to spoilage is a day of eating the family won't have. Let's try to understand what January cold means inside a medieval cottage. The fire burns in the central hearth. The area immediately around it, within 8 or 10 feet, is genuinely warm. Warm enough to feel the heat on your face when you turn toward it. But a medieval cottage is not an insulated modern building. The walls are wattle and daub, substantial, but not sufficient to truly stop the cold when January is determined. The thatch is effective, but not perfect. The window shutter doesn't seal completely. The door allows cold air through its gaps, despite the wool stuffed around its edges. Move 10 feet from the fire, to the far wall, to the corners, and the temperature drops noticeably. In a hard January freeze, the corners of a cottage might be 40 degrees even with a fire burning. Condensation forms on the inside of the walls. In the hardest cold, it freezes there. The sleeping hours are when the cold reaches most deeply. The fire is banked at night. Medieval people slept in their outer clothes in winter. Their day clothes plus additional wrappings, heavy wool blankets, multiple bodies sharing warmth. Even so, winter nights were cold in the bone-aching way that makes sleep light and broken. The Thatcher family is feeling the pressure hard by January. Robert has been careful, but the Christmas period was slightly more generous than planned, and now he's looking at what remains and feeling the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. The cold of counting and finding the number smaller than you need. Ellen knows it too. She adjusts the portions at meals without saying anything. She adds more water to the pottage. She gives the children slightly larger portions and takes less herself, and quietly indicates to Robert that he should do the same. This is a form of patience that happens in households like this in every era. The parent who consistently eats less, so the children can eat more, who never mentions it, who simply endures. Agnes Miller in better circumstances, is still careful. She does the household inventory in early January and finds enough to make it through if she is measured and disciplined. She says so to John, plainly, without drama. He nods. He'd arrived at the same conclusion separately. They work in the same direction, without needing to discuss it at length. This is what years of managing a household together produces. Agnes Miller does the household inventory in the first week of February, enough grain for porridge through to mid-March if she's measured, enough dried peas and beans for pottage through February, some salt pork remaining, the cows still providing a small amount of milk. Precious, nutritious, carefully used. Robert Thatcher's count is less reassuring. Grain for perhaps 5 or 6 weeks. But the dried vegetables are almost gone. The salt pork ran out in January. Old Margaret runs out of dried peas in early February. She tells Father Thomas, who arranges what he can. People give what they're able. The Millers provide a measure of grain. The Thatchers, managing narrowly themselves, still contribute a handful of dried beans. Small amounts that together keep old Margaret eating. She receives each contribution with a brief, direct acknowledgement and no performance of gratitude. She has lived past the age where performing gratitude seems necessary. They know she's grateful. She knows they know. By mid-January, the wood supply has become the central anxiety of Ashwick's poorer households. The stores laid in during autumn are being consumed faster than the estimates anticipated. The cold this year is harder than average. Robert Thatcher makes the decision to slaughter one of the 2 pigs. He's been delaying, wanting to preserve the animal's warmth through January, but the cost of feeding the pig now exceeds that benefit. The pig is killed on a cold morning. Robert does it himself, efficiently and without ceremony. The meat is divided, some for immediate eating, some salted and hung. Nothing is wasted. The family eats well for the first time in weeks, but the cottage is noticeably colder without the animal. The second pig, the one remaining, becomes more valued than ever, both for its eventual meat and for the warmth it provides right now. Agnes Miller wakes at night sometimes to find the tip of her nose genuinely cold, and she reaches automatically across to check Thomas in his cradle, 10 months old now, pulling himself up on anything within reach. She checks the blanket around him. She checks his face for the warmth she needs to feel. Then she lies back and waits for sleep to return. January is when illness comes. Medieval people didn't understand how disease spread, but they had clear empirical knowledge. Winter brought sickness. It was so expected that it was simply planned for, the way cold was planned for. You prepared remedies. You expected to nurse people through it. You hoped it would not be serious. In late January, young Walter Thatcher develops a cough. Ellen notices it on a Tuesday morning. It begins as the kind of cough children get and shake off in a day or 2. She watches it carefully. By the end of the week, it's worse. Walter has a fever. He's sleeping more than usual, eating less, his small body turned inward toward the fight it's fighting. Robert goes to Father Thomas, who examines Walter carefully, listens to his breathing, feels his forehead, looks at his throat. He tells Robert and Ellen honestly that Walter is sick, that they must keep him warm and fed as best they can, and that with God's grace he should recover. Robert and Ellen take turns watching Walter through the nights. Sleep deprivation adds itself to everything else: the cold, the food concerns, the daily labor of winter maintenance. Ellen's eyes are shadowed. Robert moves through his days in the particular fog of someone who hasn't slept properly in a week. The child's fever breaks on the 9th day. He's thin and weak, but present and alive, looking up at Ellen with a slightly confused expression of a 4-year-old who has been very sick and is now very hungry. Ellen cries, quietly in the corner, with her back to the children. Just for a moment. Then she wipes her face and goes to make him something to eat. Robert doesn't cry, but his hands shake slightly when he holds Walter for the first time since the worst of the fever, holding him carefully, as if relearning the weight and warmth of the boy. Walter submits to this with patient confusion. He is 4 years old. He doesn't fully understand what has just happened, but he leans against his father's chest anyway, and that is enough. She has a store of dried herbs set aside for exactly this: thyme for coughs, elderberry for fever, garlic for infection. She makes a tea of thyme and honey. The honey is precious, saved for genuine need, and gives it to Walter morning and evening. Father Thomas prescribes more thyme tea, plus a mustard plaster on the chest, a cloth soaked in heated mustard that creates warmth and draws blood to the surface, which medieval medicine believed helped fight illness. He offers prayers over the boy. Ellen sits beside Walter in the dim cottage, the herb tea steaming in a small cup, the fire burning slightly higher than usual. They can't really afford the extra wood, but they burn it anyway. Some things matter more than the calculation. In the 2nd week of January, a man named Henry Cooper, no relation to our other families, dies in his cottage on the east end of the village. He's 57 years old, which is genuinely old for a medieval labourer. He'd been ill since before Christmas, with a severe chest complaint. He fought it for 3 weeks, but January wore him down past the point his body could hold. Henry Cooper is buried in the churchyard. The ground is frozen solid, and digging the grave is hard work. 2 of the younger men take turns with pickaxe and shovel, breaking through the frost into the cold earth below. It takes the better part of a day. Father Thomas and Brother Edmund stand in the cold, waiting. Father Thomas reading quietly from his psalter, Brother Edmund standing with his hands folded and his breath misting in the grey air. The village gathers briefly. People don't linger outdoors in January to acknowledge the death. Then they return to their cottages, to their fires, to the work of survival that doesn't stop for grief. Agnes Cooper is now alone. She faces the particular vulnerability of being alone in winter, the same fragility as old Margaret, the same dependence on the charity of neighbours who have their own difficulties to manage. Robert Thatcher slaughters the 2nd pig in the 1st week of February. The warmth it was providing is no longer worth the feed it requires. The pig is killed on a cold morning, as the first was killed, efficiently and without ceremony. The meat is very welcome. The family eats well that evening, genuinely well, for the first time in weeks. But the cottage is noticeably colder now, without either pig, and that fact registers with all of them in the quiet way that facts do when nothing can be done about them. The winter is almost over. The meat they have now, carefully managed, should see them through. Should. Robert runs the numbers again in his head that evening by the fire. Should is the best word he has for it. Should will have to be enough. January evenings in Ashwick are very long. Dark by 4 in the afternoon, not light again until 8 the next morning. 16 hours of darkness, and in those 16 hours the village must entertain itself with what it has. The fire provides some light, not reading light, not fine work light, but enough to see the shapes of the room and the faces of the people in it. Rushlights, dried rushes soaked in fat and lit, provide a small, dim glow for perhaps an hour each. Candles are more effective, but expensive. Most families use them for genuine need only. The room is amber and shadow. The fire breathes. The rushlight flickers. The faces of the family emerge and disappear in the moving light. It is dim, and it is smoky, and it smells of wood smoke and wool, and the animals at the far end of the room, and it is home. The evenings are the time of stories. John Miller tells the children stories his father told him. Agnes sings. She has a good voice, low and even, and her songs are a genuine comfort in the dim evenings. Robert Thatcher tells stories about summer, about warmth and long light, and outdoor work, and the sound of the river in July. The children listen with the focused attention of people who need the reminder that this is not permanent, that summer exists, that it will come again. Edmund Thatcher, at 13, has begun to develop his own store of stories, borrowing from various sources, told to his younger sisters in a corner of the cottage, while the parents manage their evening tasks. He's found a talent for this. He makes his sisters laugh. He can hold their attention. It's a skill that costs nothing and provides a great deal. These stories serve a purpose beyond entertainment. They maintain morale. They remind people, especially children, that winter ends, that the world contains something beyond January, that the cold and the darkness are not the permanent condition of existence. Will Miller comes to old Margaret twice a week. He brings wood and occasionally food, a portion of the family's pottage, a small piece of bread. He sits with her for a few minutes when he does, and this she values as much as the physical supplies. The conversation, the presence of another person, the simple evidence that she has not been forgotten. She tells him stories while he sits, stories about the village from decades ago, about people he never knew, about winters that were harder than this one, and winters that were easier. He listens with the respectful attention of a 15-year-old who understands that listening is what's required of him, and occasionally with genuine interest when a story surprises him. This is the economy of winter that has nothing to do with wood or grain, the economy of presence, of showing up, of being the person who comes on Tuesday and on Friday regardless of the weather, because someone is depending on Tuesday and Friday arriving. Old Margaret is surviving, barely but steadily. Her joint pain is severe now. On the coldest days, she doesn't leave her sleeping place until midday, lying under every blanket she owns, waiting for the room to warm enough for movement to be possible. Her fire is maintained carefully. She cannot afford to let it drop. The cold would be dangerous at her age. Brother Edmund visits her twice in January, accompanying Father Thomas on his rounds. He's struck by her quality of endurance. She has reduced her life to its minimum requirements: warmth, food, connection, and manages those requirements with efficiency and without self-pity. There is a lesson in this, he thinks, that he cannot quite articulate, but will not forget. By the end of January, the village is tired in the deep way that extended hardship produces, not just physically, but tired of the cold, tired of the dark, tired of the smoky air, tired of the same food every day, tired of the confined space, tired of the close company of the same people in the same small rooms. Ellen Thatcher and Robert have a significant argument over food rationing in the third week of January. The argument happens in front of the children, which both of them regret. They reconcile, as they must, and as they always do. But the fight is real. January produces this. It does this to people who are ordinarily patient and kind. Agnes Miller speaks sharply to Mary over something small. Mary cries. Agnes holds her immediately, apologizes, holds her longer than necessary. But the sharpness was there. The brittle edge that sustained cold and confinement puts on people who are doing their best. The children manage. They always manage. Baby Thomas, at 10 months, is endlessly entertained by the world within the Miller cottage, the fire's movement, the cow's steady presence, the faces of his family appearing and disappearing in the firelight. He doesn't know it's January. He doesn't know it's hard. He simply is. And in this way, he is the most content person in the room. February arrives, and the village greets it with a mix of relief and wariness. Relief, because February means winter is almost over. Wariness, because February is often when the stores run thinnest, and thin stores in cold weather demand the most careful management. The light changes. Days are measurably longer in February than in December. By the second week, sunrise comes before 7:30 and sunset after 5. People remark on it. Days are stretching, they say, and these words carry more weight than their literal content. And then, in sheltered spots, in the lee of walls and hedges, snowdrops appear. Small white flowers pushing through frozen ground, improbably fragile, present as a promise. They are not just flowers. They are evidence that the world has not forgotten spring. Agnes Miller sees the first snowdrops on the 4th of February in a sheltered spot near the south wall of the cottage. She picks one carefully and brings it inside. Mary holds it with both hands. Baby Thomas, 11 months old, reaches for it immediately with both hands and considerable determination. Agnes guides his hands gently away. "Spring is coming," she tells them. Mary looks up. "When?" "Not today," Agnes says, "but soon. It's coming." She means it. She has to mean it. They all need it to be true, and it is true, which makes it easier to say with conviction. On the 2nd of February, the church celebrates Candlemas, the feast of the purification of the Virgin, 40 days after Christmas. Father Thomas leads the service, all the church's candles lit and blessed, and everyone in the village brings their own candles to receive a blessing as well. It's a cold, grey morning. People arrive bundled in everyone they own. The church is lit with unusual brightness, all those candles together, creating warmth and light that feels almost excessive after the long, dim weeks of January. The blessed candles that the villagers carry home will be used for the rest of winter. Whatever power they carry, spiritual, psychological, both, they represent the same thing that the snowdrops represent. That light returns. That spring is not a myth. For tired people, this matters more than it can easily be explained. Agnes Cooper, widowed since January, develops a serious illness in mid-February. Father Thomas visits her daily. She's 60 years old and lonely, and has been eating poorly since Henry died, and the illness takes hold of a body that has few reserves left to fight it. She dies on the 19th of February, another grave in the frozen churchyard, another household ended. Brother Edmund helps with the grave again. Standing in the churchyard afterward, he thinks about the 2 funerals he's attended since arriving in Ashwick. Henry Cooper in January, Agnes Cooper now, 2 people who were alive in October, who spoke to him, whose names he knew. The village absorbs the loss and keeps moving because it must. This is not callousness. It is simply the necessity that winter demands. Despite the signs of spring, February delivers real difficulty. A hard freeze in the 2nd week kills several chickens that had been roosting in inadequately sheltered spots. The cold tightens again after a brief, mild period, as if winter is reminding the village that it hasn't finished yet. The thatchers have very little remaining in their stores. Robert is already planning his first days of field labor, as soon as the ground is workable enough to hire out. There is no alternative. He walks the calculation every morning. What they have left, what they can forage, how many days until the fields open again. He's done this calculation 100 times. He'll do it 100 more before spring finally arrives. The children of Ashwick are learning something this winter that will shape the rest of their lives, though none of them know it yet. They're learning that hardship is endurable, that cold mornings and thin meals are not catastrophes but conditions that require management, not surrender. That you get up anyway. You do the work anyway. You keep the fire and tend the animals and help your family regardless of how you feel, because that is what the day requires. Edmund Thatcher at 13 is absorbing something he'll carry all his life, a deep, felt appreciation for enough, for a fire that's warm enough, for a dry cottage, for adequate food. In 30 years, his own children will think him excessively careful about stores and preparation. He won't be able to explain why exactly. It will simply be the way he is. And what Brother Edmund has observed all winter, what he has been committing to careful memory since October, is this: no family in Ashwick is surviving winter purely on its own resources. Old Margaret couldn't survive without Will Miller's wood and Father Thomas's food. The Thatchers are stretched, but helped by small gifts from those with more to spare. When the Cooper graves needed digging, the whole village turned out to help without being asked. This collective survival isn't organized or formal. There's no written obligation. It emerges from the understanding, deeply embedded in the life of the village, that winter is survived together or not at all. Individual survival and collective survival are not separate things. They are the same thing, expressed differently. He thinks about this often. He will think about it for the rest of his life. March arrives, and with it, warmth begins, tentatively, with reversals, with cold days still scattered through the mild ones, but genuinely. The average temperature climbs. The frosts, while still occurring, are less hard. The days are noticeably longer. Sunrise before 6:30, sunset after 6. 12 hours of natural light and those 12 hours feel like abundance after months of scarcity. The mud is back. The frozen ground is thawing. The paths between cottages are soft again. Mud, after months of ice, feels almost welcoming. Mud means movement. Mud means the ground is alive. The village breathes. People emerge from their cottages with a kind of careful joy, the way someone convalescing steps outside for the first time. Blinking in the light, turning their faces toward the weak March sun, standing up a little straighter than they managed in February. The animals are let outside. The Miller cow walks to the pasture with evident purpose, puts her head down, and begins searching for anything edible in the sparse early grass. She's been inside since October. The world outside the barn has been cold and frozen for months. Now she walks in it again, unhurried, patient, putting her nose to the ground. The surviving chickens emerge blinking and begin pecking at the thawing ground with the concentration of creatures who have been patient long enough. The donkey stands in the March sun and does not move for several minutes, as if simply absorbing the warmth of it. The animals know spring before the people do. They always do. March reveals what winter has cost. Everyone in the village is thinner than they were in October. Faces are drawn. People move with the careful deliberateness of those who have been running on insufficient resources for months. Spring food was desperately important, in ways that people understood practically without the science to explain it. Fresh food, any fresh food, was restorative. The first spring greens that appeared were gathered with a kind of urgency that looks, from the outside, like enthusiasm, but is actually something closer to need. Agnes Miller sends Will and Mary out every day in the first weeks of March to gather greens from the hedgerows and stream banks, young nettles cooked like spinach, watercress from the cold, clear water, wild garlic wherever it appears. They come back with baskets full, and Agnes cooks them immediately. The family eats them eagerly, something in their bodies recognizing what their minds don't have words for. Ellen Thatcher does the same. Joan and Cecily bring back nettles daily. Walter, recovered and gradually filling out again, joins his sisters on mild days, toddling along with the particular determined walk of a 4-year-old on important business. Baby Thomas, 12 months old now, gets some mashed spring greens into his food, and his colour improves within days. Agnes notices this. She doesn't know why it happens. She only knows that it does, and she makes sure it keeps happening. The meals in March are still simple, still pottage, still bread, still the same basic patterns as winter. But there is something in them now that winter lacked. Freshness, green things, the taste of a world that is waking up. The family eats together in the late afternoon, the March light still present through the window. Baby Thomas sits in Agnes's lap and eats from her spoon with concentration and occasional impatience. The cow can be heard settling in the barn. The chickens are audible in the yard. The fire burns lower than it did in January. The room is warmer than it needs to be. For the first time in months, there is something that feels like ease. Old Margaret has survived. This fact alone is remarkable, though she would not describe it that way. She's in her cottage, thin and stiff and moving slowly, but present and functional. On the milder March days, she sits outside in her chair, wrapped in blankets, her face turned toward whatever sun there is. She looks, to the people who pass, like someone who has come through something and knows it. Will Miller visits her in the first week of March. She tells him she survived 63 winters and intends to survive considerably more. How many more? He asks. Enough to become inconvenient, she says. He laughs. She doesn't, but her expression holds something that serves the same purpose. By mid-March, the roads are passable. Brother Edmund must return to his monastery. He's been in Ashwick since late October. 5 months, nearly half a year, lived among these people through the hardest stretch of their year. He says his farewells carefully, understanding their weight. Father Thomas receives a handshake and a blessing. They've become genuine friends. Their long winter evenings of conversation, a thing that neither of them will easily replace. Old Margaret he visits on his last morning. She's outside in her chair, taking the March sun. He kneels beside her, it seems right, and takes her hand. Safe journey, she says. Thank you for letting me stay, he says. She waves this away. You helped. Anyone who helps earns their place. He presses her hand and stands and walks away before he has to find more words. Will Miller walks with him to the edge of the village. They stand for a moment at the beginning of the road. Will you come back? Will asks. I don't know, Brother Edmund says. I'd like to. It's better in summer, Will offers. I imagine it is. He looks back at the village. But winter wasn't only hard. He turns and walks into the March morning. The sun is warm on his face. The road is muddy and long, and entirely passable. Behind him, the village of Ashwick turns toward spring. The first days of April, just beyond our story, but close enough to see from where we stand in March, bring ploughing. The oxen are brought out, thin from winter, but moving with evident willingness. The fields wait, brown and quiet, full of potential. Robert Thatcher walks behind the plough on the first day, and when the oxen stop to rest, he crouches and takes a handful of the turned earth, feeling it between his fingers. Cold, dark, faintly alive with the smell of soil waking up. He stands. His back aches. He is 42 years old, and he has felt every week of this winter. But the earth in his hand is real, and the sun on his back is real, and spring is real. Come on, he says to Edmund, who stands waiting beside him. There's work to do. There always is. So we've made it. From late October to early March, through the cold and the dark, and the hunger and the illness, and the endurance, and the spring. What do you think you would have found hardest? For most modern people, the first answer is the cold. We're so unused to being genuinely, persistently cold. Not briefly cold, not uncomfortable for an hour cold, but cold that lives with you for months and never fully relents. But I think the cold, as hard as it is, becomes something you adapt to. You learn what the medieval people learned. You layer your clothing. You stay close to the fire. You move more slowly, sleep more, work within the limits your body sets. The cold is hard, but it has a logic, and you can learn the logic. I think what would reach most deeply into modern people is the darkness and the confinement, the 16 hours of darkness, the being inside the same small space with the same people and the same smoky air for months without escape. No screen to retreat to. No private room. No music. except what you could make yourself or remember. Medieval people had an interior life that most of us have let go thin. They had memory, real, trained, capacious memory, able to recall stories and songs and prayers and conversations in full. They had imagination, the ability to build entire worlds inside a quiet mind, beside a slow fire. They had oral tradition, stories told 1,000 times that could still hold a room, because the telling mattered more than the novelty. And they had community of a kind we've largely traded away. Not community through screens. Community made of shared walls and shared fires and shared difficulty, and the knowledge that you genuinely need each other, not as a nice thought, but as a practical daily fact. We've gained so much in the exchange. I wouldn't trade back. I don't think anyone honestly would. But we've lost something too. Something worth at least knowing that we've lost. The people of Ashwick didn't think of themselves as brave or admirable. They were people living their lives in the conditions available. They did what had to be done. They endured what had to be endured. They helped each other in the quiet, practical, unsentimental way that genuine necessity produces. Old Margaret, surviving a 63rd winter with dignity and dry humour, and the absolute refusal to make more of it than it was. Will bringing wood to an old woman twice a week, because it was what was needed, and he was the one who could provide it. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the small, repeated daily gestures that winter requires. And they are what survival looks like when you see it up close. Ellen Thatcher, quietly eating less so her children could eat more, never drawing attention to it, simply doing it. Robert counting his woodpile in the dark and showing nothing of the worry to his family. The parent who consistently gives what they have and takes what remains. From where we sit, warm, full, comfortable, the winter entirely optional for us. From where we sit, they were remarkable, and they are not so far from us as we might think. Agnes Miller, waking in the night to check her baby's warmth. Brother Edmund watching all of it with careful eyes and finding himself changed by what he saw. These are not the people that history records. They didn't fight battles or rule kingdoms or write books. They planted and harvested and endured and raised children who planted and harvested and endured. Generation after generation. Winter after winter. The same cold, the same fire, the same slow waiting for spring. And here we are, their inheritors. Every one of us is the product of a long line of winters survived. The carefulness that made Robert Thatcher count his grain. The vigilance that made Agnes Miller wrap her baby one more time before sleeping. The community instinct that made Will Miller show up with wood on a cold Tuesday morning. All of that lives in us still. Quieter now. Less urgently needed, but present. You are, in the most literal sense, the beneficiary of their endurance. Right now, your room is warm. Your blanket is thick. The temperature is exactly right, maintained by technology that would be incomprehensible to everyone we've spent this winter with. You have food available to you at any hour. You have light at the touch of a finger. None of it is permanent. None of it is guaranteed. All of it was built through centuries of human effort and survival and incremental improvement, by people who began in exactly the circumstances we've been watching tonight. Be grateful for it, not in a performed, abstract way, in a genuine, felt, quiet way. The warmth around you right now is the inheritance of 1,000 winters, survived by people who had no guarantee that spring would be enough. Let the warmth settle around you now. Let your body sink a little deeper into the comfort of where you are. Let the images of Ashwick go soft and distant. The fire in the Miller cottage, amber and steady. Robert Thatcher's face in the cold as he counts his woodpile. The tiny snowdrop Agnes carried inside in February. The spring greens gathered by hungry and grateful hands in the first weeks of March. Let those images soften. They'll still be there if you want them. But for now, let them go quiet. The way the past goes quiet when the present is warm and safe and real. The village of Ashwick is sleeping, every fire banked and breathing slowly. Every family settled together in the dark. 2 graves in the churchyard, frozen ground turned back to earth. 2 lives that didn't make it to spring, and 178 that did. The people who endured this winter are resting now with the particular deep relief of those who have made it through something genuinely hard, and know that they have. Rest with them tonight. The long winter night is finally beginning to warm towards spring. The fields are soft. The snowdrops have come and gone. The birds are beginning to find their voices again in the early mornings. And the people who endured the cold and the dark and the thin stores and the long evenings and the illness and the grief, those people are still here, still in their cottages, still tending their fires, still feeding their children, and watching the light return and planning for the season ahead. They made it, as they always have, as their parents made it before them, and their children will make it after them. You've walked a full medieval winter. That's a long way to go. The hearth glows beneath its ash. The fire breathes slowly in the darkness, as it has every night of this long winter. Tomorrow morning Henry will wake first, as he always does, and scrape away the ash and find the coal still alive underneath. And the cottage will wake with a fire, and the day will begin again. But that is tomorrow. Tonight the fire breathes. The family sleeps. The cottage holds them. Sleep well. Let the warmth hold you. Let the darkness be soft and safe and kind. You are warm. You are safe. You have everything you need and more than you know. The village of Ashwick is at peace. The winter that seemed endless in January is behind them now, receding the way hard things recede. Slowly, incompletely, but genuinely. Spring is not an idea anymore. It is here, in the mud and the birdsong and the green shoots, appearing in the hedgerows and the lengthening evenings. Somewhere in the village, a child is asleep. Somewhere a fire is burning low. Somewhere an old woman is resting in her chair by the window, feeling the weak spring sun on her face and deciding, as she's decided 63 times before, that she intends to see another one. Let that be the image you carry into sleep tonight. Not the hardship, the endurance, not the cold, the fire, not the winter, the spring. Let spring come when it comes. Rest now. Let the images go. The medieval winter is over. The fire glows beneath its ash. The village sleeps. And so can you. Good night.